Good morning and welcome to Mecca Live, making engaging community connections accessible here on Thursday, August 27th, 2020. This week's theme has been trauma storage sites. Today's topic, Mind Fortress Body Bins. So, as you know, throughout this week, we've talked about the impact of trauma, the types of trauma, different categories of trauma, we can how we define it, how it is explored, different ways that we can thwart it in the sense of how awareness, knowledge, and information can help prevent trauma, but also can preempt the long lasting, the potential of long lasting effects and impacts of it when it's not addressed and not recognized and not treated. We spent some time talking about PTSD, PTSS. We've talked about the way trauma may look, how we may see what it may look like if we are speaking with or interacting with a child who may have had some type of trauma, because a lot of times the way it's manifested in children is a little bit different than adults, but sometimes it can be the same depending on the situation, depending on the type of impact and how the people around them responded. We talked about primary and secondary victims/survivors of trauma and what that means, how to navigate the different issues and aspects that surround those types of traumas, the difference between me experiencing a trauma or witnessing one firsthand, as opposed to how that trauma impacted me, the effects of that on secondary victims, i.e., family members, children, coworkers, people that are impacted by how a trauma impacted you. So we try to break down, understanding it's a big topic. It covers so many different planes and categories and aspects of life, from natural disaster to accidents to things that happen concurrently or simultaneously, all the way to ongoing, repetitive, systematic traumas. And I want to say this before I get into the topic, because I broke it down that way, the length and breadth of in a very broad sense of trauma. I want to say this: since we are mentioning that trauma is one, something that happens that leaves us feeling unsafe and insecure in the sense of a threat, or maybe our life is in danger, or something that immobilizes us to the place where we have this loss or this deterioration or this removal of safety and security in something or someone, right? So car accidents, repeated surgeries, attack, war, images of war, like, you've been there and you've had to do things and you've had to witness things, right? Different types of painful situations and abandonment in the sense of, loss, death, things of that nature, repetitive psychological trauma, being verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, those kinds of things. But I want to be clear that even though I've mentioned and identified those as potential aspects of trauma, they're not limited to that. Remember, the response that we have when we are presented with a situation that challenges us to the point where you feel like, oh my gosh, like everything is crumbling around me, in the sense that I have no security. I have no longer do I have a sense of safety because of this assault, because of this thing that's happening, this form of violation. It doesn't have to be physical. You get to define the reaction and response that you had to this event. And I know that me saying that, some people are watching and they're like, oh, well, I dropped my pencil. That was a trauma. Well, if they said it was a trauma, then it's a trauma. I'm supposed to just believe people when they say that. Yeah, you are, because you didn't experience it. There are different ways to qualify if what they are saying happened, but you cannot stand in the place of judge and jury regarding someone being, feeling, or experiencing in some way traumatized. You don't get to, none of us get that. None of us get that place. So if that's what you were seeking to secure in these videos, then you might as well just stop now. Never going to give anyone permission to qualify or disqualify someone's trauma. Not going to happen. Don't have that right. Don't have that right. And that's one of the kind of stigmas and barriers and kind of pseudo stereotypes I wanted to dismantle when we were discussing trauma. Because so often, if someone says that they were traumatized or someone mentions a trauma, it has to be something that we can see. It has to be something that nobody else experienced. Because if you and I are in the same car and we see the same thing, and I'm able to go on business as usual, but you're not, then something's wrong with you. No, there's nothing wrong. Whatever you witnessed, your brain and your body absorb that experience. And now that absorption is impacting the way we think and function, period. That's it. And maybe it didn't. Doesn't mean that one person is right or wrong, one person is sick or well. It means that we responded to this situation differently. And it's the impact of how that situation, that experience manifests and interacts with my mind and my body and either precludes me or inhibits me or in some way affects my ability to interact with the world around me in whatever capacity. And I want to say this, and then we're going to get into the topic of Mind Fortress Body Bends. I want to mention the word involuntary because I don't think I've mentioned that to date as far as this week. I don't think inside the topic of trauma that as we've unpacked it this week that I've mentioned the word involuntary. And the reason why I want to mention the word involuntary is because it's without your knowledge or without your permission. It happens. And sometimes that's how different things are triggered. That's how certain memories or certain experiences may come back, i.e., flashbacks. Sometimes they come without our permission. Sometimes they come, we have these memories, we have these experiences, right, that take us right back to our trauma or take us right back to that experience. We didn't say, let me think about that. We may do that, right? We may do that. Whether it's self-exploration as we begin to process our trauma or continue to process our trauma. Maybe we're in therapy. Maybe we're having different types of treatment. Maybe we're in group. Maybe we're in a support group. Maybe we are eliciting that experience to help either the progress of our own healing within our trauma or to assist someone in theirs. Okay. But then there are times when we are confronted without our permission, with a sense, sight, smell, touch, whatever it may be, without it being there. Our bodies remember. Our minds remember. And they both store. And so part of this is to give you permission to recognize, explore, identify, and accept this trauma thing. Whether it's one that you have experienced or witnessed or secondarily, if that's a word, experienced or witnessed in yourself, in your lifetime, within your family, or if it's information that you can use as you interact with those around you. If you have children, if your children have friends, whatever the case may be. Because the more aware we are, the more able we are, and the more able we are to be the best advocate that we can be. Whether it's a self-advocate or advocate for somebody else. Why? Because as mentioned previously, the best advocates are the ones that are the most aware with current information. Because it's going to be hard to advocate or lobby or petition on behalf of someone or regarding something without information, without a practical knowledge of the situation or the issue. And that information must be current. So it's one thing to have an understanding of how things work or systems and things of that nature. But then if you are going to step up and be an advocate and you present what you know or present the situation and then the artifacts that you use, right, the resources that you use to support your position are dated, then that renders you basically obsolete. So the purpose is that we have this awareness, we have this information, we know where to go, You know who to seek if there's people that need help beyond what you can give. If you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing, if you are not clear. So tips and skills and information, basic awareness, abilities to intervene within your skill set, and then also being aware of who to contact, where to go, and what resources are available in the event that you find yourself needing them yourself or you want to advocate and support someone that's dealing with the trauma. That's why we do this. So let's get right into it. Mind fortress, body bends. So, like I said a second ago, our minds store it and our bodies do. And yesterday we spent a lot of time discussing psychological and emotional traumas. And the reason being is one, obviously, that fits into many of the categories that relate to trauma. But generally, our emotional and or psychological traumas are the ones that you can't see. They leave the scars and the wounds that you can't see, and yet those wounds and those scars continue to give birth, continue to bear light in different aspects of our personality, our interaction ability, how we interact with people, the type of work that we do. And I don't mean like the occupation, I mean the quality of work that we do, right? I'm gonna give you an example. When we talk about PTSD in relationship to veterans, the research shows that three things pop up. I mean, there are many things that come up, but three of the main things that pop up: dysfunctional relationships, inability to keep a job, emotional imbalance. Are they everyone? No. What happens on the job? What precludes them from, the ones where these three or any of these three fit? When this is applicable for the veterans for which this is applicable, what is the problem? Like, what makes that happen? I'm a daughter of a Vietnam vet who had many of these same symptoms, directly related to what he saw and what he had to do in war. Has nothing to do with work ethic, has nothing to do with being lazy, has nothing to do with not wanting to be the best you can be. It has everything to do with the impact of trauma, everything to do with these moments where it's involuntary. I didn't mean to do that. Like, I didn't even think about doing that. Wait, what just happened? Imagine that you are experiencing something and you are feeling something and you're smelling something and feeling something and seeing something that nobody else sees. But it is very real for you. And it did actually happen, but not right now. Imagine that something that happens outside of you reminds you or causes you to feel the way you did at that moment when you were helpless and being violated. And your reality, your present reality, is requiring you to stand upright, have a pleasant face, a decent tone, a professional tone, go about your business and do what you need to do just as you're supposed to, while all this other stuff is going on. And because I can't see that you're wounded, and I can't see that there's something going on, and I don't know that I believe that this thing that you say happened to you yesterday, a year ago, a month ago, 10 years ago actually happened, that's obsolete to me. That means nothing to me because right now you're at work. Because right now you're at school. Right now, my responsibility is to make sure you learn this material. My responsibility is to make sure you do these tasks. My responsibility is to make sure that nothing that you do damages or negatively impacts somebody else because you're having a moment. It's usually when people tell you to get over it. It's usually about the time when someone says, still that? You're not over that yet? The beauty of healing and the beauty of self-care is that time is your advocate. Time is your partner. On the outside of that are the people that want you to hurry up and deal with it. Hurry up and get over it. And hurry up and get past it so you can go back to who you were before. Understand that very mentality further exasperates the healing process. And most of the time, we're not going to go back to who we were before because we're not who we were before. We're not who we were before the trauma. Now, we can recover, we can progress, and we can heal past it. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to say that we're going to go, you get in a car accident. Your car can be restored to optimal functioning. It will not be exactly the same because it's not. The car that you got, if you bought it brand new, it was brand new. No dicks, no dings, no nothing. Even if we replace all the parts, it's not that car. It doesn't make a lot of sense for us to say that to someone who's processing a trauma. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And so now on this side of it, they're racing the clock because I need to get back to that. I need to get back to that. I need to get back to that. And what happens when we're in a hurry? We miss the trees and the sunset and the flowers because we're focused on that right there. That's a race. When I ran for speed, I wasn't mindful of the scenery. I saw the finish line. When we run for distance, it's not that we're like lackadaisical in our pace. It's just I have this ability to take in everything, right? When we are headed for that, the destination is the destination. Everything is pointing toward that destination. Everything serves the purpose of getting to that destination. When our desire and our focus is to evolve, to heal, to become the best us we can be, the journey is the destination. Because once we arrive at that place, we determine the next place to go. The journey is the destination, and that's the healing process. It works along the same continuum. And in that capacity, time is our ally. However long it takes, that's how long it takes. I should be done by now. Why? Why? If we break a bone, if we have surgery, there's an average healing time. It should take between 3 to 6 weeks, 3 to 6 months for you to get to your optimum. It's just not, you have the surgery and you just wait. No, you have the surgery and you're doing rehab. And you're making sure you're following the orders that the doctor gave you, whether it's medication or movement or whatever the case may be. Yeah. And then if that time period comes, and we keep checking along the way, why do we take care of those kinds of injuries more so than the injuries that we cannot see? Because it's easy to dismiss the injuries that we cannot see. It's easy for them to be neglected and dismissed. So let's get into it. Mind fortress. So the mind is the executive command center, right? It says and the body does. That's just kind of a general way to do it. So the body is the machinery, the extension of the will of the mind in this setting. Remember, this is the context of body, mind fortress, body bends as far as our storage trauma, our trauma storage sites. So I'm gonna give you an example. If our trauma left us feeling shame or guilt or blame, then what will our body do? It's going to respond to that, right? I caused this. I am this. It's going to shape our behavior. It's going to shape how we see things. It goes unresolved, and we allow it to. It can impact how we function day to day. So if I have this sense of shame or the sense of guilt that permeates every aspect of my being, then I'm going to see that I caused this. I deserve that. I don't deserve this because this is who I am. And let me give you an example later. A lot of times, because of shame and guilt and blame, there are times when people utilize substances to escape because that feeling is just so overwhelming, right? A lot of times risky behavior because of that. But sometimes it goes the opposite direction, like withdrawal. I do what I need to do kind of under the radar, just not living your fullest life. Let's use another example. Abuse, neglect, abandonment. And these are broad categories. So if this is the case, if I'm used to being hurt, if I'm used to people leaving, then I expect it. I may not get close to people, right? I may not, um, even if it's family, I may feel like this is what it is, right? And so, relationships. How do I have these relationships when I expect you to leave, right? Or how do I have a healthy relationship if I have a history of abuse? That's gonna cause my view of love to be different. If that's the template, then these are the types of relationships I may either continue to be a part of as the abused, or I may then become the abuser. And let me be clear, we know of people that have been abused, neglected, and abandoned that don't operate in those capacities, that are able to have healthy relationships with or without treatment, depending upon the nature of and the extent of their abuse, neglect, and abandonment. So I want to be sure that you don't hear me saying making absolute statements. There is an ebb and flow and many different nuances that go into play, right? But a lot of times, if people feel like they're going to be left at some point, then how much are they really going to invest in doing something? If the end game is, and I'm going to say this as it related to some information I read about cults, if it's a cult that is fixated on the apocalypse and doom and gloom and the world's going to end, then a lot of times its members, I forget which one I was reading about, but a lot of times its members are not going to invest too much in the future. They're not going to invest too much in education and in their jobs because, the clock is ticking. Why would I spend all this money to get an education or all this money to do this, and this, maybe a house, maybe a car, when there's not a lot of time left for this planet? Why not spend that time and energy doing this, that, and the other thing, right? So my point is, when I have a sense of exploration, right? If I know that at some point it's going to go this far and then the relationship is going to go left, or at some point they're going to leave, I'm not going to invest a lot of energy in myself and time and whatever. It's just a waiting game. And how much do we miss when we do that? Last example, verbal abuse, bullying, repetitive kind of humiliation, whether it's bullying or parent-child conversation, where they're repeatedly put down or minimized. So sometimes it's not so much of that. I'm gonna use myself as an example. I understand I'm not a victim, but I do realize how these things I'm about to tell you, how they impacted how I saw myself until I decided I'm done with this. This doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Constantly compared to some of my cousins, and I said this in a different Mecca Live, but I had a couple cousins that I was compared to, and I understand as an adult the reason why the family member kept bringing them up is because they knew that I could be better. They knew that I could do better. They felt like if I tried harder. But instead of saying that, they utilized some of my cousins. Well, you should be more like this one or that one. There was like three of them that kept mentioning. And I would look at them and be like, the first thing that I recognized that was different is we don't even look alike. Like everything is different. Skin tone, hair texture, body build, height, everything is different. So there's that. Scratch that off. I can't be like them that way. Um, I was a slow reader, so being too, and I love to read. Didn't always, but I think it was somewhere in high school I began to enjoy reading. But my point is, A's, B's, they were on honor rolls, and I was fighting for every C and B I got. So if I go down that whole checklist, I was like, I'm never gonna be like them. Translation for the child's mind, if I'm not like them, then I'm less than. And so that's the message that I accept, that I received, and for a long time accepted. So when it came time to apply to different colleges, I was like surprised when I got into the one I wanted to get into because, well, I'm not these three cousins, and one went to Harvard, literally went to Harvard, and one went this way, another. And my point for saying that is that set the tone for me to expect less than. It set the tone for me to um, just operate in that middle space and not shoot for the top or shoot for whatever, right? And the phrase, it's been said that if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die trying. So if I don't reach that top, I'm not gonna just I didn't reach the top because I didn't try. I didn't reach the top because I tried and I didn't make it. And time stopped for me before I could keep trying, right? It's as benign as that kind of thing, all the way to some of the things that I've mentioned. And so we can say the same thing as it relates to relationships. If I'm so used to this type of relationship then I'm not going to seek relationships of a higher caliber, of a healthier capacity. I'm not going to do that because I'm used to this. And, generally we do as we always have. Change is something that happens by force or choice. That's my philosophy. So let's keep going. So the mind fortress, though, that part of the mind, if I get my mind right, it's easier without any disease, barring disease or any kind of compromised body, like whether it's joints or whatever. But generally, if our body isn't compromised and we barring any disease or any dysfunction or disorders, if I get my mind right, my body will follow. My body, it's easier for me to have my body become subordinate to my mind if my mind is right. So when it's not right, there's depression, there's anxiety, unhappiness, loneliness, mood fluctuations, irritability. That's a result of unresolved trauma because it puts us in a space. And if we're not deliberate about changing that space, about rearranging what's in there and getting rid of what doesn't serve us, then the same things will keep on. I remember mentioning the refrigerator. Sometimes we go on the refrigerator, I forgot that was in there. Ooh. Sometimes we're not aware that something has gone bad in the refrigerator until we smell it, senses, right? And sometimes we go and like, some of us date stuff. Like, what are the dates looking like? Okay, no, that needs to go, that needs to go, that needs to go. Because we want our refrigerator to stay clean. Why? Because we eat the stuff out the refrigerator. Sometimes there's stuff that's good in the refrigerator but tastes horrible because we were sitting next to something that went bad and we forgot about it. Gotta clean the refrigerator. Same thing with our mind. Our bodies. How do our bodies become bends when we look at this unresolved trauma? High blood pressure, heart disease, liver disease. Sometimes we develop substance abuse issues and drug addictions. Sometimes we have digestive issues, IBS, ulcers, colitis. Sometimes chronic fatigue syndrome is one of the ones that is one of the diseases or disorders. It's on the CDC. So it came up when I was looking for other things that aren't commonly discussed when you're talking about unresolved trauma. And I can go on from there. Chronic pain, pain that can't be associated with any disorder or illness, but there it is, right? It manifests. And it's hard when it's like something like chronic fatigue syndrome that doesn't show up under a microscope and is one of those things where it's so many different symptoms and that play into it that you can't see under the microscope and is not on its own associated with a known disease or a known illness or a known disorder, right? But there it is. So that's one that's difficult to process, especially when if there's a diagnosis that can't be seen. People are suffering, but we can't see it under the microscope, and there's no way to. And that can add to the trauma piece too. She's not really sick; she's just tired. She's just lazy. Okay. So let me say this as we wrap up. And I want to be clear that our instinct, though, when we're doing something and something happens, right, and we experience something unpleasant, our normal reaction is to withdraw from that. We don't want to go through that again, right? But as it relates to trauma, our tendency, our instinct is to bury it or minimize it or avoid it. And avoid, minimize, or bury the feelings related to it. But I want to tell you, feel the feelings. I'm going to tell you why. Let me give you an example. Feel the feelings because so doing may be the key to the healing process. And when we feel what we feel, allow ourselves to feel what we feel, we are able to create a coherent narrative, meaning I can put together why I feel the way I feel. Like what happened? If we explore that feeling, allow ourselves to feel it, then we can put it into words. And when we put it into words, we're able to create a coherent narrative. And that's a powerful tool. That's your story. That's your history. And it helps toward trauma resolution. It helps us make sense of our history and make sense of our story. It helps us break intergenerational cycles, depending upon the trauma, right? And it helps us become stronger and better parents, better partners, and better child advocates. And this is why this is the example, or not the example, I want to tell you this piece. When I was getting my master's, My faculty liaison for my internship. His name is Ed Taylor, and he had us do what he called our conceptual framework, and I can talk about that and then later. But one thing he said to me, because I didn't want to get anything wrong, because I recognize that as a mental health professional with my master's degree, I could mess up and mess up somebody's life. Like I took that very seriously, and I still take it very seriously. And so he was like, trust your instincts. Um, one of the other one of the other leaders said that her name was Sue Hewitt, I think it was her name. She would say, because we were around the group and um, they would give us advice, they would do different things. And she was like, for you, trust your instincts because your instincts are generally spot on. But you have us. If you're wrong, you have us. But we're not gonna let you mess up. We're not gonna let you do anything that's gonna seriously injure someone mentally. We're not gonna do that. But we need you to get to the place where you're self-sufficient and self-reliant, right? Understanding that you still have us as resources. But one thing he told me, I was like, I can't figure it out. I can't figure out what's going on with this kid. And he said, well, when all else fails, go for feelings. I'm like, what? And he was like, when all else fails, check in with their feelings. And I heard it in my head. How does that make you feel? And right when I heard it, he said, and not in a how does that make you feel kind of situation, although that's what you're going for, right? So what he was telling me was when when I'm able to understand how somebody feels, I'm able to get to the place where they explain it, then I can get to what's happening. It's the same thing when we're processing trauma. Generally, there's a feeling associated with what's happening or has happened. Avoiding it is avoiding the process, is avoiding, um, even if you start processing your trauma, neglecting what it made you feel like, neglecting the feelings that happen when you remember it or it's brought back to your memory or it's triggered, allows you to process only in part. So why do that? It's difficult enough to deal with things that are not pleasant. It's difficult enough to even talk about the topic of trauma, let alone I'm going to do it halfway. And understand it's hard. This is hard work. I'm gonna give you a quote. We are at 32, so we're almost done. I'm going to share with you a quote by Dr. Lisa Firestone. Facing our trauma isn't easy, but it is a fundamental aspect of healing mentally and physically. It's a tool for building better relationships and a key to unlocking our truest selves. We watch these movies where the hero runs the gauntlet and then once they get through the gauntlet and they're met with this obstacle, then the dragon comes and then the floor drops out and then all this stuff and the army comes and their army is dead or incapacitated, so it's just them fighting this whole thing and we rally behind them because oh my gosh, we want the underdog to win, we want the hero to win. We know that if they win then they can save the people that are, but in this situation you're the hero saving you, or you're part of the hero's team building the bridge to healing for someone else. There are some battles that are not worth the fight. And there are some wars we are not meant to fight. But if on the other side of this ugly, temporary, difficult, painful process is the best you, is the truest you, you have to make a decision if that is worth it. If you're okay on this side, no judgment. But if the best you, living the most peaceful life you can live, is on the other side of this gauntlet called process, what's the choice you're going to make? And sometimes you making that choice helps other people make that same choice. We're talking about emotional revolutionaries. We're talking about the people, if we look at the civil rights movement, if we look at women's suffrage, and we look at, any of the wars that, well, I mean, I say any of the wars, but some of them go back. But if we look at these people that said, this is wrong, we can do better. And they knew, many of them knew, I'm going to fight this and I may be standing by myself. Or I may fight this and I may not be able to come home tonight. I may be in jail, I may be killed. But this is the right thing. And if I die, going in this direction, I'm okay with that. And that wasn't even about their own trauma. Processing the trauma is not going to kill you. There's only reward on the other side. Only reward on the other side. That's it. All right, let's wrap it up. So you're at homework. We're going to talk about fueling trauma, fueling healing. So think about your own experiences. Is there anything that you're doing or not doing that fuels the trauma or the experience of that trauma? Is there anything that you're doing that promotes or fuels the healing process of said trauma? And if I can't think of any traumas, I don't think that I have any. Okay. If you don't, what is one thing based on your personality that could fuel the trauma? What's one thing based on your personality that could fuel trauma healing? So let's say you haven't had any of these experiences or whatever. Let's say you have one. What would you do? What would be the best next step to process it? And what would be the least best step to process it? Because I want to make sure everybody's included when we have this at homework. All right, wrapping it up at 36 minutes past. 6 minutes past, but we're at 36 minutes. Tomorrow's topic is trauma release valve and cleaning house. So we're going to continue. Tomorrow wraps up as the last day of our trauma storage sites series for this week, theme for this week. Tomorrow's topic, trauma release valve and cleaning house. Be kind to yourself that you may be kind to others. And as always, speak life.